Det lyder igen og igen fra Israel, at de beklager de civile tab i Gaza, men at det er Hamas, der har ansvaret, og nogle gange er det uklart, hvad der er sket, men ofte er det ikke spor uklart. Tag for eksempel angrebet den 11. juli, hvor et israelsk luftangreb dræbte 5 medlemmer af familien Ghanam, der boede i Rafah i Gaza. Human Rights Watch, menneskerettighedsorganisationen, besøgte stedet 3 dage efter og fandt ikke skyggen af tegn på, at huset var blevet brugt til militære formål, til våben, raketaffyringer eller militante. Familiens slægtninge var knyttet til det militante islamiske jihad, men ingen i huset tilhørte gruppen. Israel har ikke sagt, hvorfor de blev ramt eller hvordan familien blev advaret. Jeg havde tidligere den israelske viceambassadør i studiet og spurgte ham, hvordan det kan være et forsøg på at undgå civile tab.
We Israelis are not immune from mistakes, but I don't know any other armies in the world that are sending leaflets before they have an operation, that are calling people, sending text message, and that are cancelling a military operation because there are civilians in the vicinity. Yeah. So, and we did it not once and not twice, but many.
You're asking them to leave the areas, but where would you suggest they leave?
To another places.
What other place?
The pictures that are being shown are quite sometimes not accurate. I mean, that's correct that there is a damage in the Gaza Strip, but the damage is mainly in 2 neighborhoods, Bet Hanun and Sajaiya, where is a center of Islamic and Hamas terrorism. Yes, but the other parts of Gaza, many other parts of Gaza are not being
the damage you're talking about has quite concrete consequences, right? This Saturday morning, 18 members of a single Palestinian family, the Al-Najjar family, were killed in an Israeli tank opening fire at their house. 10 of the dead in that family were children. Until now, there have been no reports of this family being affiliated with any terrorist gang or any military purpose. How is this avoiding civilian casualties?
Martin, you're going again into specific issues.
I could go into
okay.
scores of similar issues.
And we should remember when we discuss those things how this all started. Who is exactly targeting here civilians? Who is shooting 2,500 rockets over civilians?
Yes.
And who is doing its best in order to avoid civilians? But there is a very big difference.
Yes, I know, but this is not answering the question. How is this case actually avoiding civilian casualties? There were no evidence of this family being warned.
Civilian casualties are, unfortunately, a part of any military operation. That happened to be the case in Afghanistan and in Iraq, in Libya, and in other places where Danish forces as well as other international forces are being...
But the Israeli government specifically claims to try to avoid civilian casualties.
And we did.
And I'm asking
and we were quite successful actually in avoiding many casualties. The fact on the ground that correct there are a lot of casualties, but there could have been much more if we wouldn't have taken the measurements that we are taking.
What measurements? This Al-Najjar family, 18 people being killed. I mean, we just stop and think about that for a second. 18 members of the same family being killed. You know why they were in that house? They were in this house because they fled from another area that was bombarded. So they fled to this area, just as you told them. And what happened? They got killed. How is this avoiding civilian casualties?
Again, the specific story that you're telling about this family, I'm not up to the details about where they were before and what was in their apartment and so on. We saw for many times that Hamas militants and terrorists are being hidden behind the civilians on the same places, shooting from mosques, from schools,
no evidence
from heavily dense populated areas.
No evidence was put forward about them hiding. Hamas fighters hiding behind this family.
There is an option that this is a mistake. I'm not denying the fact. Well, I cannot really saying a mistake or not since I'm not up to date.
Okay, so
we can check, of course, those kind of things, and we are doing it on a daily basis.
So what about the 272, more than 200 children being killed until today? Are they mistakes?
I haven't seen the data of all the civilians being killed. I know this thing is being examined. I can only say that this is a tragedy, and I can offer condolences as part of Israel. But I will say the following: we have the obligation, and that's what we're doing, to take the absolute measures in order to minimize the number of casualties. But it's Hamas is doing it very difficult for us, trying to. hide behind them.
You're not taking the measures you're talking about. We have 1,000 deaths, 75% civilians. 75% civilians.
If you compare those...
Let them just more than 200 children. Neighborhoods completely flattened. 22 hospitals, clinics, medical centers. More than 200,000 civilian people being displaced. Nowhere safe to run.
Martin,
and you're saying you're taking the utmost precautions to avoid civilian casualties.
I'm sure you're very much up to the details, so I'm sure you know.
You should be too.
Yes, but you know the number of tunnels that we were evacuating. You know the weapons that we found out, the rockets that we discovered. These are not just naive neighborhoods, innocent neighborhoods that we started one bright day to attack. We have intelligence.
That the civilians are responsible for the tunnels?
No, I'm claiming that unfortunately civilians are being hijacked by Hamas and being targeted by Hamas actually. They are hiding behind them, and we are calling them to leave the area in order to go to another safe place. And Hamas telling them, please stay.
Just like this family did, and they were killed.
I'm not sure again about the specific case, but in general, that's how we operate.
So you're saying that you bear no moral responsibility of these civilians being killed. More than 200 children being killed by Israeli mortar fire from tanks, from planes. You have no moral responsibility.
I didn't say we don't have a moral responsibility. I just say that those kind of things, unfortunately, are part of any armed conflict. There hasn't been one armed conflict in the world where there were no civilians being hit.
What is your moral responsibility?
First, our moral responsibility is to try, and I think our defense forces are doing, I don't know, as I told you before, any other armies that take the precautions that we are taking. We are trying, and this is the goals of the operation, to try to find out all the tunnels and to try to weaken Hamas in order to give quiet and peace to the people, civilians living in Israel. Why aren't we talking about that? Those people that got 2,500 rockets without doing anything. We withdrew from Gaza until the last centimeter in 2005.
Yes, but I'm asking you about your arguments trying to avoid civilian casualties. In the war against Hezbollah in 2006, Major General Gadi Eisenkot talked about what happened to urban districts in Beirut where Israel was fired upon. We will use disproportionate force on it, and we will cause great damage and destruction. From our standpoint, this general said, these are not civilian villages, these are military bases. So you don't see this as civilian, you see this as legitimate targets.
There might be investigation, probably there will be in the end of this operation, that they will require whether we were right or we were wrong. There are also internal investigation in Israel. What I can say that in those two neighborhoods that I mentioned before, that most of the damage is there, those are neighborhoods that are core and headquarters of Hamas. Most of the buildings there were headquarters of Hamas. I'm sure you looked in the internet and you saw a lot of clips
most of the buildings were headquators of Hamas,
about tunnels starting from people's kitchens, from people's houses. They are hiding behind the civilians.
Okay. So you're saying again and again that they're hiding behind civilians. This is your line of argument, and this is Benjamin Netanyahu's line of argument. Where's the proof? Where's the proof that Hamas is hiding behind civilians?
There are a lot of information in the internet that you can see people firing from hospital windows, from schools. UNRWA themselves, the United Nations organization, admitted, the spokesperson of the United Nations Secretary General admitted that their school was being used for rockets.
Two empty schools, Roi Dvir. 2 empty schools were being used for storage of rockets.
Is it okay to use schools for rockets? Is it okay to have your headquarters in the middle of the hospital?
Your argument is that they're hiding behind civilians. The schools were empty.
Maybe some schools were empty, but also
the schools you're referring to were empty.
Using the civilian assets, if you don't know, using civilian assets for combat operations are war criminal. You know, you become you violate international law.
The schools you are yourself referring to now were empty.
Okay. So maybe some of them were empty, but some of them, some apartments, some other areas were heavily populated.
Okay. So let's take your argument at face value. You only target houses and areas used for military purposes. That's what you say. If that's true, you still have the consequences of your of your acts. Now more than 1,000 people have been killed. Even you yourself say that less than 25% of these people are military people, gunmen, and so on.
I didn't say that. I said that the data is still unclear, and we don't know the ratio between civilians and militants.
Until now, this has been the ratio, even when looking at the numbers coming from Israel. So if you actually fire at someone, a military person, an installation or rockets or whatever, and you know that this is surrounded by civilians, just as the case is in the Gaza Strip, you have to think about what the consequences of firing is, that a lot of civilians will die, right? It has to be proportional.
Yeah, definitely.
We agree?
Definitely.
Okay, so what's the proportional argument for more than 200 children dying in Gaza?
If you check the number of civilian and casualties that were in Gaza, which again, as I said, we are deeply sorry about every one of them, comparing to other small, similar scale operations in the world, in the Western world and others, you will still find that it is relatively low comparing to the depth of the operation, comparing to how sophisticated it is, and comparing to the very dense area that we are operating
Let's
in.
agree that for the families in Gaza, this is not something just to think. It's, they don't think that this is so low.
We are having the whole conversation about the families of Gaza, and even not one question about the families in Israel.
Well, if you were from Hamas or a Palestinian ambassador, I will ask you those questions. But you are responsible for your own government.
But I would like also to stress the fact, as part of this interview, that we have people, civilians, law-abiding people, living in not only in Sderot and around Gaza, but also in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and other cities that did nothing wrong, and they are being targeted by Hamas.
Yes.
How do you expect the Israeli government and the Israeli army to operate when being targeted like that?
Okay, so
if Denmark, if rockets would have fly to Denmark from one of the neighboring countries, I think the Danish government, Danish army would have
also... The Danish government, by chance, does not occupy their neighboring countries.
We are not occupying any centimeter of Gaza as well, not since 2005.
That's another discussion. I just wanted to answer the last thing. Much more Israelis, not these Israeli people, Palestinian civilians have been killed the last 2 weeks. Much more than over the last 2 years. So what is the proportional moral argument for you to kill more than 200 children in Gaza?
I think, again, we shouldn't comparing any numbers here.
Why not?
Because we should look at the sources, at the roots of this operation. We should. This is a defensive operation. We are fighting here for our civilians' right to live freely and not to run into the shelters every 15 seconds without doing anything wrong. We have a lot of ambitions that Gaza Strip will be a prosperous area, that we will have neighbors that are prosperous. Unfortunately, this is not the case. Gaza was supposed to be the first step into the future Palestinian state that we would like to see. This just happened to be a place, a center for terrorism, Hamas, jihad, and the Iranian influence.
Do you accept that as a fact that much more people, including Israelis, have died the last 2 weeks than during the last 2 years before the conflict?
Maybe in the numbers you're right, but I think we have to look into the overall picture, and we have to look about who is the terrorist, who is the aggressor in this case, and who is trying to defend its population. That is our only claim. Once there is a peaceful situation for our people, for our civilians, we will stop. We don't, and we stopped already.
Quiet will be met by quiet, as
Definitely.
Benjamin Netanyahu said. And you just rejected a ceasefire proposal from the Americans.
There are a lot of negotiations as we speak, and speaking about ceasefire, we agreed to 3 or 4 or 5 ceasefires during this operation, that some of them Hamas asked themselves, and they themselves broke the ceasefire. So it's up to them to explain their logic. But it will be a safe bet to say that the welfare and the situation of the civilian people of Gaza that we are all carry for is not in front of their eyes. I don't know what is their exactly ideology. Probably it's the annihilation of Israel. That is what is written in their charter. But I think both sides now, both Israel and the Palestinians, with the mediation, has to reach to a situation where we not going to be in the same situation in a year or 2 years.